The archetype that got blamed for everything. There is a pattern so old it predates the first myth, the first scripture, the first whispered warning around a village fire. A pattern so familiar it hides in plain sight. It repeats in every culture, every century, every language, every story that pretends to be about heroes and monsters and gods and sinners, but is really about a split mind trying to hide from itself. And nowhere is that pattern clearer than in the feminine archetypes that the world keeps blaming. Not because women caused anything, not because feminine energy is dangerous, but because the feminine symbol has always represented the one thing the ego cannot survive. Inner knowing, perception, remembering, the rose at the center of the heart. Whenever the mind shatters into duality, the ego follows a single law. Attack what can expose you. That's why the feminine carries the blame. Not because she did anything, but because she symbolizes the thing the ego fears most. The quiet voice that cannot be deceived. Every fallen woman, every dangerous enchantress, every temptress, every witch, every siren, every betrayer is one message with different costumes. The inner light was turned into the enemy. Now the archetypes unfold, not as folklore figures, but as metaphysical mirrors. Eve, the first question ever asked. Eve never symbolizes a woman. She symbolizes the first ripple in the mind. What if I am separate? The fruit is perception. The fall is identification with the surface self. Adam only collapses after listening to Eve because form always follows perception. The ego must blame Eve because if the inner voice were innocent, the entire story of separation dissolves. Medusa. The fear of truth before readiness. Medusa is not a monster. She is what happens when the unhealed mind looks directly at truth. The gaze freezes. Stone is not punishment. Stone is fear. Medusa becomes horrifying because the ego cannot admit the real terror. I saw myself and panicked. If Medusa were holy, the ego would have to melt. Circe, the one who reveals the animal mind. Circe doesn't turn men into animals. She reveals the impulses that were already there. She is not a seductress. She is perception exposing instinct, appetite, egoic hunger. Anything that exposes the ego becomes dangerous. Exposure is death to illusion. Circe is clarity, and clarity gets condemned. Pandora. Curiosity that opens the box of belief. Pandora is curiosity, the same curiosity that leads toward awakening. She doesn't unleash suffering. She simply lifts the lid on what was already believed. The ego cannot tolerate revelation, so it blames the one who opened the box and not the contents themselves. Lilith, woe, the mind that cannot be controlled. Lilith refuses submission because truth never bows to form. She is demonized because the ego must punish what it cannot dominate. Lilith is the uncaged mind, dangerous only to illusion. The Snow Queen, the ice of perception without love. The Snow Queen is not a villain. She is the iciness of intellect separated from spirit. Kai doesn't fall because she seduced him. Kai falls because the shard in his eye, the fracture in perception, made the Snow Queen look divine. The Queen is blamed because the ego cannot face the only real confession. I did this to myself. The Sirens. The call inward reinterpreted as doom. Sirens don't lure anyone. They sing. Their song is the memory of home. The ego fears that call because inwardness feels like death to what never lived. The shipwreck is the resistance, never the song. The enchantress. The revelation that perception is power. What the ego calls a spell is simply perception-shaping experience. If perception creates reality, blame collapses. There is no world left to accuse. The enchantress becomes dangerous because she reveals the one truth the ego cannot tolerate. The world is not the cause, the temptress. Desire misinterpreted. The temptress is not desire. She is the symbol of longing misinterpreted as flesh. Desire is always for God. The ego projects it outward and then condemns the figure it projected it onto. She is a mirror, not a seducer. The betrayer. The collapse of a false foundation. The betrayer never betrays the hero. The betrayer exposes the hero's illusion. Every betrayal in myth is the moment the ego's script collapses. The ego punishes the betrayer so it never has to say, "I trusted the unreal." The witch. The mind that remembers. She is the seer, the knower, the intuitive, the healer. She is burned not for evil, but for memory. She represents the part of the mind that cannot be deceived. The ego exiles what it cannot fool. All of these archetypes are one archetype. Every one of them is the inner feminine. Intuition, remembrance, perception, inward vision, the rose at the center, the calm that does not move, the voice the storm cannot shake. And in the Snow Queen, that archetype is Gerda. Gerda is purified perception. Gerda never buys the story. Gerda never fights the cold. She melts it. Gerda never battles evil. She sees through it. She succeeds because she never leaves truth. Everyone else loses their mind because they believe the snow is real. Gerda remembers the rose. Gerda holds the field open. Gerda is the perceiver the ego cannot freeze. The story is not about good and evil. It is about perception splitting, perception freezing, perception thawing, perception remembering. It is the journey from the shard in the eye to the rose in the heart. It is the metaphysical arc of the feminine archetype reclaiming its throne, not by power, not by force, but by sight. The open field is what remains when the snow dissolves. Presented tonight was a gallery of myths, legends, and whispered tales, each pointing not toward a woman to blame, but toward a mind afraid of its own reflection. A mind that split itself in two, then cast its better half into the shadows and called it danger. But sooner or later, in every kingdom of ice, someone remembers the rose beneath the snow. And when that happens, no queen, no curse, no monster endures. Just a mind waking up in a place known as the Twilight Zone.